The warning lights flashed red across Jake Martinez's cockpit as his small reconnaissance ship spun out of control. Smoke filled the cabin, and sparks flew from damaged circuits. The enemy pirates had caught him by surprise during what should have been a routine patrol mission. Their energy weapons had torn through his ship's hull like paper. "Come on, hold together," Jake muttered through gritted teeth as he fought with the controls. The planet below grew larger in his cracked viewscreen. Kalos Prime looked like a green and brown marble from space, but Jake knew better. Every pilot in the human fleet had heard the stories about this death world. His ship hit the atmosphere hard. The hull screamed as it heated up from friction. Jake's harness cut into his shoulders as the ship bucked and rolled. Trees rushed up to meet him faster than he wanted to think about. At the last second, he managed to pull the nose up just enough to avoid a direct impact. The crash was still terrible. Metal shrieked against rock as the ship carved a deep furrow through the forest. Jake's head snapped forward and back as they hit boulder after boulder. Finally, the ship came to rest against a cluster of massive trees, smoke pouring from its broken engines. Jake hung upside down in his harness for several minutes, checking to make sure all his parts still worked. His left shoulder ached and blood ran down from a cut on his forehead, but nothing seemed broken. He hit the harness release and dropped to what used to be the ceiling of his cockpit. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Even through his ship's damaged air filters, he could smell something wild and dangerous outside. It reminded him of the big cats he had seen in zoos as a child, but stronger and more threatening. Jake grabbed his emergency kit and weapon from their storage compartments. His military training kicked in automatically. First priority was to assess the situation. Second was to find shelter. Third was to signal for rescue. He had done this before on training missions, but never on a planet where everything wanted to eat him. He forced open the emergency hatch and stepped outside. The forest around him was unlike anything he had ever seen. The trees stretched up so high he could barely see their tops. Thick vines hung down like curtains, and strange flowers glowed with soft light even though it was daytime. Everything was too big, too bright, too alive. Then he heard the howl. It came from somewhere deep in the forest, low and haunting. It sounded like a wolf, but bigger, much bigger. Jake's hand moved to his sidearm without thinking. More howls answered the first one, coming from different directions. They were surrounding him. Jake moved quickly back to his ship and began pulling out everything useful he could carry. Food rations, medical supplies, tools, ammunition. He stuffed everything into his pack while keeping one eye on the tree line. The howling was getting closer. His communication equipment was completely destroyed. The distress beacon was damaged but might still work if he could find the right parts to fix it. That would have to wait. Right now, he needed to find somewhere safe to hide. Jake remembered his briefings about Kalos Prime. The planet was home to creatures that had evolved to be perfect killers, shadowhounds that could phase through solid rock, flying predators with razor-sharp claws, and worse things that the survey teams had never lived long enough to properly document. He picked a direction away from the loudest howls and started moving. His military boots crunched on fallen leaves that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Every sound made him freeze and listen. Every shadow could hide something deadly. After an hour of careful movement, Jake found what he was looking for: a rocky hillside with several cave openings. Caves meant shelter, and shelter meant a chance to survive long enough for rescue. He approached the largest opening carefully, weapon ready. That was when he saw her. She was huddled in the back corner of the cave, barely visible in the dim light. At first, Jake thought she might be human, but as his eyes adjusted, he could see the differences. Her skin had a faint blue tint and seemed to glow softly like the forest plants. She was small and thin, probably no taller than his shoulder if she stood up. Her large eyes were a deep violet color that seemed to hold too much sadness for someone so young. She was clearly not human, but she was also clearly intelligent, and she was hurt. Jake could see bandages made from torn cloth wrapped around her arm and leg. She looked like she had not eaten a good meal in weeks. When she saw Jake, she pressed herself further back into the corner of the cave. Her violet eyes went wide with fear. She said something in a language Jake did not understand, but her tone was pleading. Jake slowly lowered his weapon and held up his empty hands. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him for a long moment, then pointed to a small device clipped to her belt. It looked like some kind of translator, but it was clearly damaged. Sparks occasionally flickered from its cracked casing. Jake reached into his pack and pulled out one of his emergency ration bars. He tore open the package and held it out to her. She looked at the food like she could not believe it was real. When she finally took it from his hand, her fingers were shaking. While she ate, Jake examined the cave more carefully. Someone had been living here for a while. There were makeshift tools carved from stone and wood, a small collection of edible plants and roots, signs that she had been trying to survive alone in this deadly place. Outside, the howling started, again. This time it was much closer. The girl looked toward the cave entrance with pure terror in her eyes. She grabbed Jake's arm and shook her head frantically, pointing toward the sound. Jake understood. Whatever was out there, she had been hiding from it. And now it was coming for both of them. Jake quickly moved to the cave entrance and peered outside. 3 massive shapes moved between the trees like living shadows. They were bigger than any wolf he had ever seen, with glowing red eyes and claws that seemed to cut through the air itself. The shadow hounds had found their scent. The alien girl tugged at his sleeve and pointed deeper into the cave. She whispered something urgent in her own language, then gestured for him to follow. Jake grabbed his pack and weapon, staying low as she led him through a narrow passage he had not noticed before. The passage twisted and turned, going deeper underground. The girl moved with confidence even in the darkness, clearly knowing every inch of these tunnels. Jake had to admire how she had survived here for months. Most humans would have died within days on this planet. They emerged into a larger chamber far from the entrance. The girl had made this place into a real home. She had woven grass into sleeping mats and carved small shelves into the rock walls. A tiny stream of fresh water trickled down one wall into a natural basin. It was simple but clever. Jake sat down his pack and tried to communicate with her. He pointed to himself and said Jake clearly. She understood immediately and pointed to herself, saying something that sounded like Zara. Jake repeated her name and she smiled for the first time since he had found her. Over the next few hours, they worked together to fix her broken translator device. Jake had basic electronics training from the military, and Zara seemed to understand technology even better than he did. Her long fingers moved delicately over the tiny circuits while Jake held a small flashlight. When the device finally crackled to life, Zara's first words in broken English nearly broke Jake's heart. "Thank you for not leaving me to die alone," she said, her voice soft and musical even through the mechanical translator. Jake learned her story piece by piece. Zara belonged to a species called the Villani. They were peaceful researchers who studied plants and animals on different worlds. Her ship had been attacked by the same pirates who shot down Jake. Her crew members had been killed trying to protect the research data. She had been left for dead when the pirates decided she was too weak to be worth selling as a slave. "I thought I would die here," Zara said, touching the bandages on her arm. "The creatures hunt at night. I could only come out during day for a short time. Food was running out." Jake examined her wounds more carefully. They were infected and getting worse. His military medical kit had antibiotics, but they were designed for humans. He had no idea if they would work on her alien biology. "We need to try," he told her. "These wounds will kill you if we don't treat them." Zara nodded bravely. Jake cleaned her wounds as gently as he could and applied the medicine. She winced, but did not cry out. He wrapped fresh bandages around her arm and leg, impressed by her toughness. While they worked, Jake shared his military rations with her. She ate slowly, making each bite last as long as possible. He realized she had been starving herself to make her meager food supplies last longer. "Tomorrow we start hunting for real food," Jake told her. "And we need to make this place more secure." Zara showed him her maps of the cave system. She had drawn them on pieces of bark using burned sticks. The drawings were detailed and accurate, showing multiple escape routes and places where fresh water could be found. She had marked the territories of different predators and noted their hunting patterns. "You are very smart," Jake said with genuine respect. "These maps could save our lives." Over the following days, Jake began teaching Zara basic survival skills, while learning from her knowledge of the planet. He showed her how to make simple weapons from metal pieces of his crashed ship. She taught him which plants were safe to eat and which ones would make him sick. Jake's military training had emphasized aggressive tactics and overwhelming force. But on Kalos Prime, those methods would get them both killed quickly. Instead, he had to think like a guerrilla fighter. Use the environment as a weapon, strike fast and disappear. Never fight fair when fighting smart was an option. They set up early warning systems around their cave using thin wire and small bells Jake had salvaged from his ship. If anything large tried to approach while they slept, the noise would wake them. They also prepared multiple escape routes and cached supplies in different locations. Zara proved to be a quick learner. Her people might be naturally peaceful, but she had a sharp mind for tactics. When Jake explained how to create a deadfall trap, she immediately understood how to improve the design using the planet's unusual gravity. "Humans think differently than Villani," she observed one evening as they worked on sharpening wooden spears. "Your minds jump to fighting and protecting. My people think first of hiding and avoiding. Together we make better plans than either could alone." Jake nodded. She was right. His aggressive instincts balanced her cautious nature. Her deep knowledge of the planet's ecosystem helped him choose which battles to fight and which to avoid. Their first real test came on the 5th day. A pack of shadowhounds discovered their main cave entrance and would not leave. The creatures seemed to know that prey was hiding somewhere nearby. They prowled around the area for hours, their red eyes glowing in the darkness. Jake wanted to fight them directly, but Zara had a better idea. She led him through the tunnel system to a place where the roof was supported by a single large boulder. They spent hours carefully removing the smaller rocks that held it in place. When the shadowhounds finally found the tunnel entrance, Jake used his remaining emergency flares to lure them into the trap. At exactly the right moment, he and Zara knocked away the last supporting stones. The roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, trapping the creatures on the other side of a wall of rubble. They could hear the shadowhounds howling in frustration, but they could not reach their prey. "Smart girl," Jake said, grinning at Zara. She smiled back, and Jake realized that for the first time since crashing on this deadly world, he actually felt hopeful about their chances of survival. 2 weeks after Jake had found Zara, her wounds were healing well thanks to his medical supplies. She was growing stronger each day, but Jake noticed something else that worried him. Small black spots were appearing on her blue skin, spreading slowly from her old wounds. "Zara, we need to talk about these marks," Jake said one morning, pointing to the spots on her arm. She looked down, and her face went pale. "I hoped they would go away," she said quietly. "But I know what they are. Villani, call it shadow sickness. It comes from cuts that touch certain plants on this world." "How long do you have?" Jake asked, though he was afraid of the answer. "Maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then the sickness reaches my heart, and I die." Jake felt his stomach drop. After everything they had been through, after all their careful planning and successful traps, she was still going to die, unless they could find better medicine. "My ship," Zara said suddenly. "The medical bay had advanced healing machines. If they still work, they could cure the shadow sickness." Jake remembered seeing the wreck of her research vessel from the air during his crash landing. It was on the other side of the valley, in territory controlled by the most dangerous predator on Kalos Prime. "Tell me about the apex stalker," Jake said. Zara shivered even though the cave was warm. "It is as big as your crashed ship, maybe bigger. It can change colors like the trees and rocks. Sometimes you cannot see it even when it stands right in front of you. It is smart too. Smart like us." "How smart?" "Smart enough to set traps. Smart enough to learn from mistakes. 3 other survivors from my crew tried to reach the medical bay. The stalker killed them all, but it killed them differently each time. It learned from what they did." Jake studied Zara's crude map of the area around her ship. The apex stalker had claimed nearly a square mile of territory around the crash site. Nothing else lived there. Even the shadowhounds avoided that area. We need those medical supplies, Jake said finally. So we're going to get them. Jake, no, it is suicide. Better that I die here with a friend than we both get killed by that thing. I didn't save you just to watch you die from some alien disease. We're going to figure this out. For the next 3 days, Jake scouted the edges of the stalker's territory. He moved carefully, using every stealth technique he had learned in the military. The creature's domain was eerily quiet. No bird sounds, no insect noises, nothing. Even the plants seemed afraid to make noise. Jake found signs of the stalker everywhere. Claw marks on trees that were 15 feet off the ground. Massive footprints in the soft earth near streams. Bones picked completely clean and arranged in neat piles. But he also found something else. Patterns in how the creature moved. It had favorite hunting routes and preferred ambush spots. It followed a schedule like any other predator, just more complex than most. On the 4th day, Jake returned to Zara with a plan. The stalker hunts in cycles, he explained, showing her his own rough maps. 3 days hunting in the eastern part of its territory, 2 days in the western part, 1 day resting in the caves near the big waterfall. Today is the first day of its eastern hunt. That gives us maybe 6 hours to reach my ship, get the medicine, and get out before it comes back. 6 hours might not be enough. The medical machines need time to work. Jake had thought of that too. Then we don't run, we make sure it can't find us. He had spotted something during his scouting that gave him an idea. The river that ran through the stalker's territory went underground near Zara's ship, flowing through a natural tunnel system. If they could reach those tunnels, they would be invisible to the creature's senses. Water will hide our scent and the sound of our movement, Jake explained. The tunnels are too small for something that big to follow. What if the tunnels flood? What if we get lost? Then we die trying instead of just waiting to die. Zara looked at the spreading black spots on her skin. They were getting larger every day. You are very brave, Jake Martinez. Or very crazy. Maybe both. They spent 2 more days preparing for the mission. Jake made waterproof containers for his weapons and the portable medical scanner from his emergency kit. Zara gathered plants that would mask their scent even underwater. They practiced swimming in the cave's small pool until Zara could hold her breath almost as long as Jake. On the morning of the attempt, they moved out before dawn. Jake carried most of their gear while Zara guided them through the safest routes she knew. They reached the edge of the stalker's territory just as the sun was coming up. The silence was overwhelming. Jake had been in combat zones that felt less dangerous than this peaceful-looking forest. Every shadow could hide death. Every rustling leaf could be the last sound they ever heard. They found the river and slipped into the cold water without making a splash. The current was stronger than Jake had expected, but they managed to swim downstream, staying close to the banks where the water was shallow enough to touch bottom. The entrance to the underground tunnel was exactly where Jake's scouting had indicated. They took deep breaths and dove down, following the river as it disappeared into the rocky hillside. Swimming in complete darkness was terrifying. Jake had to fight every instinct that told him to surface and breathe. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Just when his lungs felt ready to burst, they emerged into an underground pool lit by glowing fungi. "We made it," Zara gasped, treading water beside him. They climbed out onto a narrow ledge and oriented themselves. According to Jake's mental map, Zara's ship should be directly above them. They found a natural chimney in the rock that led upward, with enough handholds to climb. When they finally emerged from the ground near the crashed research vessel, Jake's heart sank. The ship was in much worse condition than he had hoped. The hull was cracked open like an egg, and vines had grown through every opening. It looked like it had been there for years instead of months. But the medical bay was in the most protected part of the ship. If anything had survived, it would be there. "Stay alert," Jake whispered as they approached the wreck. "If this was easy, your crewmates would have made it." They were halfway to the ship when Jake saw it. A slight shimmer in the air like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But the day was cool and cloudy. The apex stalker had come home early. Jake grabbed Zara's hand and pulled her toward the nearest cover. The shimmer in the air was moving slowly, like it was hunting for something. The apex stalker knew they were there. but it had not spotted them yet. They pressed themselves against the hull of Zara's crashed ship. Jake could feel his heart pounding so hard he was sure the creature would hear it. Beside him, Zara was shaking but staying quiet. Her survival instincts had kept her alive for months on this deadly planet. The shimmer moved past them, heading toward the spot where they had climbed out of the underground river. Jake realized they had maybe 2 minutes before it found their scent trail and tracked them down. "Medical bay," he whispered directly into Zara's ear. "Now." They slipped through a crack in the ship's hull as quietly as they could. Inside was a maze of twisted metal and broken equipment. Zara led the way through passages she knew by heart, moving toward the center of the vessel where the medical facilities were located. The medical bay was in better condition than Jake had dared to hope. Emergency power was still running, and several of the healing machines were undamaged, but what Jake saw next made his blood run cold. 3 Villani were lying on medical beds, barely alive. Their blue skin was almost white, and the black spots of shadow sickness covered most of their bodies. They were breathing, but just barely. "My friends," Zara whispered, rushing to their side. "I thought they were dead." Jake checked the medical readings on the machines. All 3 aliens were in critical condition. The shadow sickness was much more advanced in them than in Zara. They had maybe hours left to live. "Can the machines cure them?" Jake asked. Zara was already working at the medical computer, her fingers flying over the alien controls. "Yes, but it takes 6 hours for full treatment, and the machines can only treat 1 person at a time." Jake looked at the 4 Villani who needed treatment. Even if they started right now, they could only save 1 of them before the others died. And that was assuming the Apex Stalker did not find them first. "There has to be another way," Jake said. Zara pointed to a second medical bay through a doorway. "That room has emergency treatment pods. They work faster, but not as well. Maybe 2 hours each, but only 60% chance of working." Jake made a quick decision. "We use both. You take the main treatment since you're strongest. Your friends get the emergency pods. But if the emergency treatment fails, they die anyway. If we do nothing, they die for sure. 60% is better than 0%. They worked quickly to move the unconscious Villani into the emergency pods. The machines hummed to life, pumping healing chemicals into their bodies. Zara climbed into the main treatment unit and Jake started the full healing process. Then he heard it, a sound like metal being torn apart. The Apex Stalker had found the ship. Jake grabbed his weapon and moved to the medical bay entrance. Through the ship's broken windows, he could see the creature clearly now. It was even bigger than Zara had described, with 6 legs and a head full of teeth that could bite through steel. Its camouflage skin rippled with colors that matched the forest around it. The creature was being methodical, searching the ship section by section. It knew they were inside somewhere, and it was not going to give up until it found them. Jake had 2 hours before the emergency treatments were finished, 6 hours before Zara was fully cured, and nowhere to run even if the treatments worked. He started moving through the ship, looking for anything he could use as a weapon or trap. In the engineering section, he found what he needed. The ship's power core was damaged but still functional. If he could overload it at the right moment, the explosion might be enough to drive off even the Apex Stalker. Jake began rewiring the power systems, connecting the core to the ship's external lights and communication array. He could not make a bomb big enough to kill the creature, but he could create a massive flash of light and sound that might confuse it long enough for them to escape. The Stalker was getting closer. Jake could hear it tearing through the ship's outer sections, following their scent trail. In 30 minutes, it would reach the medical bay. Jake finished his work on the power core and returned to check on his patients. The emergency pods were working, slowly pushing the shadow sickness out of the 3 Villani, but they were still unconscious and would need time to recover even if the treatment worked. Zara was awake in her treatment pod, watching the progress displays. "How much longer?" Jake asked. 4 more hours for me. 1 hour for the others, but they will be very weak." Jake heard another crash as the Stalker broke through another section of the ship. "We don't have 4 hours." He made another impossible decision. "I'm going to stop your treatment early. You'll be cured enough to move but not fully healed. Jake. No. If you stop it too early, the sickness will come back. If I don't stop it, we all die in the next 20 minutes. Zara looked at her dying friends, then at Jake. Do it. Jake activated the emergency release on her treatment pod. Zara climbed out, still weak, but able to walk. The black spots on her skin had faded but not disappeared completely. The emergency pods finished their cycles with soft chimes. The three Velani were breathing normally now, their skin returning to its natural blue color. But they were unconscious and could not walk. Now what? Zara asked. Jake had been thinking about that problem. In the ship's cargo bay, he had found materials that could work. Using parts from both his ship and hers, he could build a transport vehicle, something that could carry the unconscious Velani while protecting them from attack. We build a way. Out, Jake said. And then we run like hell. Over the next hour, while the Apex stalker continued its methodical search, Jake and Zara worked frantically to construct their escape vehicle. They used hull plating for armor, ship engines for power, and medical equipment to keep the patient stable during transport. The result was ugly, but functional. An armored box on wheels that could move fast enough to outrun most predators while keeping its passengers safe inside. Just as they finished loading the unconscious Velani into their makeshift ambulance, the medical bay door exploded inward. The Apex stalker had found them. But Jake was ready. His hand was already on the power, core overload switch. Close your eyes, he told Zara. Then he flipped the switch and turned their escape into a war. The power core exploded in a blinding flash of white light. The ship's hull rang like a giant bell as energy coursed through every metal surface. Jake felt his teeth vibrate from the sound. Even through his closed eyelids, the light was so bright, it hurt. The Apex stalker screamed, a sound like tearing metal that made Jake's ears ring. The creature stumbled backward, its camouflage flickering wildly as it tried to process what had just happened. For a moment, it was completely visible, and Jake got his first clear look at the monster that had terrorized this part of the planet. It was even more terrifying than he had imagined. The creature's hide was covered in scars from countless battles. Its 6 legs ended in claws that could tear through steel, but it was the intelligence in its yellow eyes that scared Jake the most. This was not just a mindless predator. It was a thinking enemy that would learn from this encounter. Move, Jake shouted to Zara. They pushed their makeshift transport vehicle out through a hole in the ship's hull while the stalker was still stunned. The unconscious Velani were strapped securely inside the armored box, their life signs being monitored by salvaged medical equipment. Jake had built the vehicle to be fast, but speed meant noise. As soon as they started the engines, every predator within miles would know exactly where they were. Their only advantage was that most creatures on Kalos Prime were afraid of the Apex stalker's territory. They would be running toward safety, not away from it. The transport bounced and lurched as they raced through the forest. Jake drove while Zara navigated, calling out obstacles and dangerous terrain ahead. Behind them, they could hear the stalker recovering from the flash attack. Its angry roars echoed through the trees. How long before it catches up? Jake asked, steering around a fallen tree. Not long, Zara said, checking the rear sensors they had mounted on the vehicle. It is faster than us, but it has to be careful. The explosion damaged its eyes. It cannot see as well as before. Jake had counted on that. The bright flash would have overloaded the creature's advanced visual system, giving them a temporary advantage. But temporary was the key word. They needed to reach friendly territory before the stalker's vision cleared completely. They were halfway to the edge of the creature's domain when disaster struck. The transport's left front wheel hit a hidden rock and snapped off. The vehicle lurched to one side and crashed into a tree, throwing Jake and Zara forward against their restraints. Steam rose from the damaged engine. Warning lights flashed red across their improvised control panel. They were not going anywhere on wheels. Can we fix it? Zara asked. Jake checked the damage. The axle was bent and the engine was cracked. Even with all his mechanical skills, repairs would take hours they did not have. We go on foot, he decided. Jake, no, my friends cannot walk. They are still too weak from the treatment. Then we carry them. It was an insane plan. 4 unconscious aliens, each weighing about as much as a human adult. 2 miles of hostile terrain filled with predators, and somewhere behind them, the most dangerous hunter on the planet was tracking their scent. But Jake had not come this far to give up now. They rigged carrying harnesses from the transport's safety straps and medical tubing. Jake took the 2 heaviest Villani while Zara carried the lightest one and helped support the 4th. It was awkward and exhausting, but they could move. The stalker found the crashed transport 20 minutes later. They could hear it investigating, the wreckage following their trail with deadly patience. It knew they could not have gone far carrying so much weight. Jake led them through the thickest parts of the forest, where the creature's size would work against it. They waded across streams to confuse their scent trail and climbed over fallen logs that would slow down their pursuer, but the stalker was learning. Each time they tried a new trick, it adapted faster. When they tried to hide their trail in a muddy stream, it simply circled around until it picked up their scent again. When they climbed through dense undergrowth, it found ways to go around or through obstacles that should have stopped it. "We are not going to make it," Zara said during a brief rest. She was exhausted from carrying her friend, and the shadow. Sickness was starting to return because her treatment had been interrupted. "Yes, we are," Jake said firmly, "because I just heard the most beautiful sound in the galaxy." Zara listened carefully. At first, she heard only forest sounds. Then she caught it too, the distant hum of starship engines. "Rescue ship?" she asked. "Hopefully." Jake was already pulling his emergency beacon from his pack. The device had been damaged in the crash, but he had managed to repair part of it during their weeks in the cave. He activated the beacon and prayed it would work. High above the forest canopy, Captain Ryan Foster was piloting a human search and rescue ship in a grid pattern, looking for any sign of Jake's crashed vessel. When the beacon signal appeared on his screens, he immediately changed course. "This is Captain Foster calling Lieutenant Martinez. Do you copy?" Jake's voice came through full of static but clearly relieved. "Ryan, boy, am I glad to hear your voice. What's your situation down there, Jake? I've got 4 critically injured aliens who need immediate medical attention, and we've got a very large, very angry local predator about 2 minutes behind us, Captain." Foster looked at his tactical officer. Extracting people from a hot landing zone was dangerous enough. Adding alien civilians and unknown hostile creatures made it nearly impossible. "We're coming down," Foster decided. "Find a clearing big enough for a landing and mark it with anything that burns." Jake spotted a small meadow about half a mile ahead. They pushed themselves harder than ever, carrying their unconscious patients toward the landing zone. Behind them, the stalker was getting closer. They could hear branches breaking as it forced its way through the forest. The rescue ship landed just as Jake and Zara stumbled into the clearing. Medical personnel rushed out to help with the injured Villani, while ship security took defensive positions around the landing zone. "Everyone aboard," Captain Foster shouted over the ship's engines. That was when the apex stalker burst from the tree line. The creature was magnificent and terrible at the same time. Even the experienced human soldiers stopped to stare at it for a moment. It stood on its hind legs, towering above the rescue ship, and let out a challenge roar that shook the ground. "Weapons free," Foster ordered, but Jake held up his hand. "Wait, don't shoot it." "Are you crazy? That thing's about to attack my ship." Jake studied the stalker's posture. It was not attacking. It was claiming territory. The creature had followed them this far, but it would not leave its own domain to pursue them further. "It's not coming after us," Jake explained. "It's just making sure we know this is its home." The stalker stared at them for a long moment, its yellow eyes fixed on Jake. There was something almost like respect in that gaze. Then the creature turned and melted back into the forest, disappearing as if it had never been there. As the rescue ship lifted off from Kalos Prime, Jake sat beside Zara in the medical bay. The ship's doctors were completing her treatment for shadow sickness while her 3 friends recovered in healing pods. "Why did you do it?" Zara asked him. "Why risk everything to save people you had never met?" Jake thought about the question, seriously. "Because that's what humans do. We don't leave people behind, no matter what species they are, no matter how impossible the odds seem." Zara smiled weakly. "The galaxy is lucky to have humans in it." When they reached the nearest human space station, Jake found himself being awarded medals for heroism and tactical excellence. But more importantly, his actions had started something new. Human Command created a special rescue unit dedicated to impossible extraction missions on hostile worlds. Jake was offered command of the new unit. As he looked out at the stars from his office window, he knew that somewhere out there, other beings were trapped and waiting for someone crazy enough to attempt their rescue. And humans, he thought with satisfaction, were definitely crazy enough for that job.